Hi.
Hello there. Just the two of us for now?
Seems so. I think Andreas will join soon.
Ah, there he is.
Hey, good to see you.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Let me just quickly open the doc. Cool. Let's get started. Adam, would you like to start?
Sure. So you kind of answered all my questions. So there was a question about database performance optimizations. How do we verify? Do we have a test suite or some kind of performance test process? And yeah, nice proposal. I quickly ran through.
Yeah, I think it's a good proposal. We've done changes in the past where they were supposed to have a performance impact, and we were doing like more ad hoc benchmarks. But there was no sort of established go-to benchmark that you can run to understand things. But we saw never actually being able to log all the queries. And that proposal turns it not upside down, but it's a little bit different. So that would be really useful to have.
Cool. Yeah, and the next one was about huge pages on the database instances, if it's enabled or not. And yeah, that issue was just opened a few days ago about enabling huge pages. So that's
right.
good to see. I will be really curious about the results.
Right, I guess you're spot on with both points, seeing that those issues were just created. Yeah, I was also curious to find out what happens with huge pages when we get to that. Cool. I wanted to point out two rather, let's say, unfortunate changes that made it to production. One was the incident yesterday that we have with a column removal, and the RCA is also quite interesting to look at because it was not that we shipped a migration that was just removing the column and not ignoring it like you should, but it was sort of a coincident deploy of two rather conflicting changes. So one was basically removing the column, and the other one was unignoring the column at the same time, and that sort of led to the incident yesterday. We're sort of discussing how we can avoid that. One option is to also make the ignored columns attribute a mandatory part of reviews, but on the other hand, it's really hard to see, and I really don't want reviewers to, have to catch those things. I think ultimately what would have saved us is a better integration testing where we'd be able to see those two changes integrated and testing those, but that didn't catch it yesterday, at least. And the standard procedure is also documented in the database documentation. When you want to remove a column, basically you first ignore the column, then the code gets reloaded, and then you're free to remove the column in the post deploy. And that was supposed to happen yesterday, but for quite a few twisted reasons, it didn't. Any comments about that? Or all right. The second one was a MR that got in that was actually deployed on production, and that was adding, really simply just adding a reference to an existing table. And in this case, it was the events table that got an additional column and a reference to another one. And since we require indexes for foreign keys, we also require when you use add reference that you also create the index at the same time. And unfortunately, this doesn't create an index concurrently. So it just runs plain standard create index, which is a problem on a large table because it basically locks the table. And the sort of countermeasure for that was to add a Rubocop for add reference. So we can either like forbid add reference at all, or we can do the same thing as for add index and just check if the table exists already. Because if you do it on a new table that you just created, then that's fine. For an existing table, especially a large one, that's a problem. So the Rubocop is going to hopefully catch those things.
Just one question. Would it make sense maybe to patch the index creation to always do it concurrently?
That's a good idea. The problem with that is that you can only create indexes concurrently if you're not inside a transaction. And in a usual migration, you want to be inside a transaction. So yeah, combining both, like you can't just always do add or create index concurrently because of that, right?
Right.
So basically, we can only use reference when we are creating a table, right? We cannot use reference in other instances.
Yeah, that's right. When you create a table, you're free to use add reference. As soon as we work on existing tables, we'd rather use what was it? Add concurrent foreign key, I guess. So there is a concurrent helper for adding the index, adding the foreign key, and it does the same thing, but just in a concurrent fashion. Myra, would you like to continue?
Yes, my question. So I only have one question, and I have been reviewing a lot of background migrations lately. And from all the reviews, I always get different batch sizes and different delay interview lapses, like 5 minutes or 8 minutes. And I was just wondering, like, do we have something like a magic formula to determine those, or those are just based on one judgment? How do you determine those?
Yeah, no, I don't think we have a magic formula for that. Would be great to have one, but I think in the end it's always based on GitLab comm. So we try to schedule these for the size of GitLab comm. When you think about batch size, I think batch size is the clearer one of the two, where let's say you're updating records, and then the batch size sort of determines the scope of the records that you lock, basically. And you don't want to lock like millions of records, and at the same time you also want to make some progress. So balancing that out makes sense. And determining the batch size, I'd sometimes look at how long the update takes, for example. So if you know that this particular update is heavy because it also runs a heavy select or whatever, then this can take like 10 seconds. And now the question is, do you want to hold the lock for 10 seconds, or would you rather like lower the batch size in order to make this to speed it up and then only hold that lock for maybe a second or so? But that really depends on the kind of migration that you run. And the other consideration that you can have is when you update a lot of records, or any record that you update is going to produce a det tuple in Postgres. So basically when you let's say we try to update the whole table, then we would basically make another copy of all the records, and the table will be double in size after that, right? So that's also a reason why we do batches, because then you specifically when you run them outside of transactions, then you'd be able to update a batch and then wait a bit and then update the next batch, and there's a chance for those dead tuples to be reclaimed, maybe by your own updates that you do later, or maybe by the AutoVacuum that runs in background. So that's also a reason why we want to batch. And I tend to think that the delay interval kind of plays into that, where you basically stop for maybe a minute or two, and this gives like processes like the AutoVacuum a chance to kick in and clean up after your last batch, basically. And obviously it's also a way of spreading out the load, so you don't have like a spike in traffic on the database, but rather spread this out across a longer time. I don't have a good formula either for the delay interval, though.
The delay intervals of 2 minutes sounds reasonable, but what about delay intervals of 8 minutes? Because we have some of them. Do we really need 8 minutes in some cases?
I'm not really aware of a migration that is like taking 8 minutes to complete for a single batch. So maybe it was just cautionary in a sense, or if we can afford spreading out the load, I don't see a reason why that would harm us. I think it's more harmful to have a shorter interval than a longer, obviously.
Isn't there also the replication between the nodes that should be taken into account? Like it can be quickly on the write node, but the read-only nodes can take a while to sync up with that. Like for example, we had a truncate on a table with millions of records at some point, and that was trouble for the replication lag, and it was really fast on a read-write node. Mm-hmm. I don't know if we have examples for that more often, but that can be a factor to take into account.
Yeah, that makes sense. Mm-hmm.
But I guess that won't happen too often.
Thanks.
Sure.
Yeah, the next one was from me. I think you already had a quick look at it. So basically they wanted a page of all the job artifacts, and they wanted to filter them by name of the build. So they need to do a join with the builds to find the job artifacts. And there for GitLab CE, there were about 12 million job artifacts. And yeah, I don't know how many builds, but that will be something in the same range, and that was timing out. I'm not sure whether it is something we can do if we want to filter like on text string.
Mm-hmm. I did the same thing like you did earlier. I think I ran the query before this meeting, and it still hasn't finished, so it's not a great query. I think when you look at the plan, I only managed to get the non-analyzed plan, basically, just what the planner estimates. And this is really just a nested loop on a really large index scan. So there is like 12 million records on the one hand side and the other one. So for each of those 12 million records, you would basically do another index scan that has an additional filter on top of that. So basically the second node is not ideal in a sense that you may have a better index for that, where you actually be able to satisfy all the conditions from the index, right? So on the one hand side, there's a lot of records. On the other hand side, the second node isn't greatly optimized. But then again, if you just scanning like 12 million records from an index isn't like super fast. What is sort of interesting in that context is I think it lends itself quite good to partitioning. That is because there is quite a, like we're only looking for records for a particular project, right? And we retrieve them from the index, which isn't really fast in this case because there is so many records. But if we had like smaller indexes or tables that would sort of only contain the job artifacts for particular projects, we'd be able to narrow down the size of things, or the size of the index would be smaller, or maybe we would actually be able to scan the table instead of the index. We'd still be seeing 12 million rows, so still not great, I guess. And actually, if we can get rid of the join and just look at the first 20 or so, that'd be no problem, obviously. But the join.
Yeah, you need to join for the project ID, if I'm not mistaken. So that's.
For the build name, isn't it? So there is project ID on job artifacts.
Oh yeah, right, yeah.
And then we look for the name and the type. So if that information was present on the artifacts table as well, we would need to join, and that could be quite optimized for. But that basically means probably means duplicating that information, which is a way of speeding things up. You denormalize, but then you also troubled with the fact that you need to maintain that information consistently.
Yeah, I'm thinking whether we maybe should like reorganize or rebuild the page instead of trying to list all artifacts at once. List a bunch of jobs, and then asynchronously people can collapse items to see which artifacts are in there or something like that.
And each of those calls would just load for one particular build the artifact.
Yeah, in theory it will be an n+1 light query, but then yeah, it only happens when the user does something. So I haven't looked at the correct and like the role design of the page, but yeah, I'm not sure if we can make this scale anyway. So.
I mean, if you want, we can try adding a better index for that query and see if that speeds things up. I'm not heavily optimistic though.
It would be an interesting exercise, I think. Unless there's something else on the agenda, we can do that first, maybe.
Sure. I don't know if the index creation finishes until the end of the meeting, but we can definitely kick it off. I'll share my screen. Can you see my terminal okay? Cool. All right, so this is basically about this node. We have an index already on the job artifacts ID. And we want these additional columns. So what we could do is creating an index on CI builds, which is going to take forever. But anyways, on the ID and the name, and then make that one partial and say only for the CI build type kind of things. So in this case, we would basically have the same index prefix as we already do. So the ID is still in there. And then we satisfy the name lookup on the index, because that is presumably something that changes when you do a different search. And then we make that one partial, so we would only look at the builds. Does that make sense?
Would it make sense to make it unique?
Good question. Well, ID is the primary key, so that one already makes it unique. What would you expect from making that a unique index?
So to be honest, I don't know. Just maybe figure if you specify a unique index, maybe a different algo is being used to build the tree for the index. Not sure.
As far as I'm aware, it's both the same tree structure, basically. It's just that you enforce the additional constraint by an index lookup.
Okay.
And since the idea is you're right, we could make this a unique index because the idea is already making sure that we would only see, or there is only one instance of any record there. I don't think it would make a difference towards how the index looks like. All right, how about we let that run, and I'll post the result later on Slack or so. Probably takes a little bit. Meanwhile, should we move on?
Yes, I do have another question. So I have encountered some background migration that tried to update a lot of records and with different values each. So normally what people do is to fetch those records, like iterate on them on batches, and then search for each one of the records to an update query, which causes a lot of queries. But I am not really sure if we have a way to do it, a performant way to do it, or another way to do it, because to insert multiple records, we have the bulk insert method on GitLab, but we don't have a bulk update method on GitLab. So what do you think?
Yeah, in the case you linked, I think the problem is that you can't even retrieve the new values that you want to update from the database, because it's something about fingerprints, and we calculate that in the migration, basically. So just a random thought, what you can do is making that a two-step process, and basically prepare the data that you want to see in a separate table, and then run a batch update on the actual table. So that is something I've been doing somewhere else, where you can even you can even create a temporary table for that, or an unlock table to make it even a bit faster. But then you'll be able to insert into that table basically from the application. You can even use batch inserts for that. And then when you're done, you basically move that data over. You would batch updates from the temporary table to the original table, and then drop the temporary table. We don't have a mechanic like this in place, though. And it's also rather rare, isn't it, that you basically calculate the new values in the in application code? Or do we have that more often? But if we have that more often, I think the byte job type would be nice to look into.
Yeah, I haven't encountered many migrations like that, but I think only 2. But in those 2 scenarios, the same thing happened. They are fetching other records into memory and then iterating by one, and then updating one by one, which I think it is like the Rails way to do it, but I was wondering about the Postgres way to do it, which might be the table.
Yeah, maybe we can open an issue on this and make the proposal. And if we see this more often, then we have like a back record when we could have used it and how urgent we need it.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
Thanks.
Sure. Adam.
Yeah.
Postgres package.
Yeah. So this is just an idea. So I guess we are using the standard package that was provided by the operating system, Red Hat or CentOS.
So on GitLab Comber on Ubuntu.
Ubuntu.
And yes, meanwhile, we started to use the standard package.
Okay, so it's just bordering. It could be an interesting experiment to see if we compile the Postgres package ourselves with, let's say, a specialized compiler flag to the CPU instructions that we are using. We could gain some performance benefits out of it. But this is just really an idea and not, I mean, we cannot really expect too much performance out of it, but could be a nice optimizations for later on.
Yeah, I guess it goes back to what we discussed earlier about having a performance testing thing. If I'm not mistaken, I think we actually compiled Postgres ourselves for the Omnibus package, but I could be wrong. But I saw some custom flags for that. And for GitLab.com, we started to use a different approach when we moved to Patroni, where we actually used the standard packages. But yeah, there might be room to improve that. I don't know if you're interested in that kind of things. If you want to reach out to the infra folks about that.
Yeah, I create a ticket.
Cool.
Go ahead, Nick Anishi. Sorry, I was just joining the eavesdrop, but since I hear it would be interesting. It would. Other than that, it would be interesting to know how much the improvement could be. Because it's one of those ones of it's good to do compiler flags, but if it's only going to buy us 1 to 2%, it's a lot easier to just deal with the standard package.
While we're talking about .com, what is the progress on going to Postgres 11, or what's the plan on that?
So my understanding is that we paused the effort a few weeks back, and I'm not aware of us picking it up again. On the other hand, we're okay. On the other hand, we're actively discussing Postgres partitioning, and I think if we wanted to start that in a good way, we would actually need to use Postgres 10 at least. And there is obviously the discussion or the effort required to upgrade GitLab.com, and I'm not aware of this actively being discussed. And on the other hand, we also require 9.6 for the standard package. So that's the current minimum requirement for GitLab. and we would also have to bump that. And I think the plan to bump that was we would still wait a few releases if we follow the original plan. So that's my understanding at the moment. Do you have like special interest in Postgres 10 or any feature you're looking for?
No, nothing in particular. But yeah, I'm just wondering because Omnibus is at 10 now, and we're planning to go to 11 with .com, and I was just wondering why or how it would be, or what the reason is behind that, and maybe that that has some reasoning or whatever.
I would actually love to align that better because yeah, we should be. I think we should be running what we also ship to customers. And you're saying that Omnibus is on 10, but we still allow 9.6, don't we? So the 10 is the standard package that we ship.
Yeah, we ship both, and I think you can disable the upgrades while creating a file, and it should be running 9.6 already. But if you would do a clean install, I think you'll get just the newest one.
Yeah, I think it would be good if we can align that better. I think also for testing, if I'm not mistaken, we run the CI suite on 9.6, whereas we probably should also do 10. And since we also support 11, we should probably also do that.
On CI, I think we have been running 2 versions, but I'm not sure we still do that. Maybe when we have like a single code base again, would be easier and less, yeah, resource hogging to do that again. But I don't know.
Yeah, good point. All right, so the index creation is still running. I'll report back later. I wanted to once again advertise the Postgres conference coming up in October in Milan, Italy. And I know at least 3 of us are going, so if you want to take a look, I think it's a good conference to go to. And they also offer training, but I think the most important or the most interesting one has already sold out, unfortunately. But the conference is still good, can really recommend.
Are you all staying in the hotel itself or another venue, something like that?
We got an Airbnb somewhere in the city, so a shared flat, I guess. Cool. Well, there's nothing else. I'll keep an eye on the index creation thing. And it's good to see you all here. See you next time.
Bye.
Bye. Have a good one.